Greetings to you, sir, and to our classmates. So, we are the group one, and our topic will be all about sex and sexuality. So, but before we go to our proper discussion, allow me to introduce to you our co presenters. So, you have there Dabby Jones Banogon, Karen May Benoy, Chana Louise Beroin, Maple K Cadungog, Gian Rainer Dino, Jonna Chris Elcarte, Christiane Tinapao, and yours truly, Kiana Green Bornea. So for our table of contents, we have there for letter A, what constitutes sex? So under that, we have primary characteristics, secondary characteristics, reproductive roles, and reproductive responsibilities. And for letter B, what is sexuality? Under that, we have psychosocial dimensions of sexuality and discovering your sexual orientations. We have next for our next recorder.
Okay, so what constitutes sex? So sex refers to a set of biological characteristics. It is mostly linked to physical and physiological characteristics like as chromosomes, gene expression, hormone levels and functions, and reproductive or sexual anatomy. Sex is commonly classified as female or male, although the biological characteristics that make up sex and how they are manifested differ.
So now let's talk about the primary characteristics. So first, the primary sex characteristics are the characteristics present at birth, and they are the body structures that make sexual reproduction possible. So the primary sex characteristics are the sex organs, and they comprise of the external and the internal genitalia. So for the males, you have the penis as the external genitalia, the prostate gland, seminal vesicles, testes, among others, are the internal genitalia for males. Then for the females, you have the vagina as the external genitalia, and the ovaries, uterus, fallopian tubes, among others, are the internal genitalia. So these primary sex characteristics enable males to make and deliver sperm, while it gives the ability to the females to bear children. Next slide, please. So this is the image of the human reproductive systems. So the blue one, that is the male reproductive system. So some changes in male's primary sex characteristics include enlargement of the penis and the testes, production of sperms, and secretions released from the prostate gland, which is essential for sperm health and motility. Now for the pink one, that is the female reproductive system. So changes in the female reproductive changes in the female's primary sex characteristics include occurrence of ovulation, menstruation, and the development of the vagina and the uterus. Next slide, please.
We will now proceed to the secondary characteristics that also constitutes the sex. So sexually dimorphic characteristics that are not directly involved in reproduction. These characteristics are features that appear at puberty and will later become prominent. So sexually dimorphic means a distinction of a different sex of the same species, a male and a female. Next slide. In males, testosterone directly increases size and mass of muscles, vocal cords, and bones, deepening the voice and changing the shape of the face and skeleton. Taller stature is largely a result of later puberty and responsive facial and body hair. The hormones responsible for the secondary sex characteristics in males is testosterone. So next slide, we have here the list of characteristics in which we can know the distinction between a man of that of a woman. We have abdominal and chest hair, also more hair on other parts of the body, more facial hair, taller stature on average, higher waist to hip ratio on average, broader shoulders and chest, wider than hips, heavier skull and bone structure, greater muscle mass and strength, a prominent Adam's apple, and a deep voice. Fat deposits mainly around the abdomen and waist, so it gives an apple shape. On average, larger hands and feet than women and lower digit ratio on average. Next slide. In females, breasts are the most obvious manifestation of higher levels of estrogen. Estrogen also widens the pelvis and increases the amount of body fat in hips, thighs, buttocks, and breast. So the hormone responsible for the sex characteristics of females is estrogen. And on the next slide, we have the list of characteristics in which we can know the distinction of females from males. So female secondary sex characteristics: more pronounced breasts, shorter stature on average, lower waist to hip ratio on average, wider in hips, less facial hair, higher voice or higher pitch, more subcutaneous fat deposits mainly around the hips, so it gives women pear shape, and higher digit ratio on average. So that's all. We will now proceed to the reproductive roles.
Next slide, please. So next would be the reproductive roles. So this refers to the efforts required to ensure a society's labor force of reproduction, such as child rearing, domestic tasks, and the care for family members, such as children, sick, elderly workers, tasks that are mostly done by women. So basically, the reproductive roles are those necessary activities done to maintain and sustain human life. Next slide, please. So for the male reproductive role, first is a provider. So the majority of men think that being a good provider entails financially sustaining a family. That is not all it means. So a man's role in his family should constitute emotional, spiritual, physical, and mental well-being and should not be overlooked. Next is a protector. It includes safeguarding her and your children's self-esteem and worth. It might also mean defending your family's life and safeguarding the things that you and your family consider important. Next is as a leader. So a father always have the power to take the lead in making family decisions and leading the family. Lastly, for the reproductive role of male is a teacher. With both words and deed, it is critical to provide example for children, loved ones, and the community. Set high standard expectation and lead by example. Next slide, please. So for the female reproductive roles, first is the wife. So a woman is a man's companion, partner, and an ally. She offers appropriate setting for a male partner to focus more on the family's economic well-being. He looks on her for love, sympathy, understanding, comfort, and acknowledgement. Next role is as an administrator and a leader of the household. So she divides responsibility among the family members based on their interest, ability, and she provides the necessary tools and materials. She is also responsible for meal preparation and serving, clothes selection and care, laundry, house furnishing, and maintenance. So these are the domestic tasks a woman do. So she also organizes numerous family social gatherings for social development in her role as an administrator. Next role is a manager of the family income. So it is her obligation to get the most out of every penny she spends. So the family's income is supplemented by the woman's earnings, both inside and outside of the home. She divided her earnings wisely across the categories such as essential, comfort, and luxuries. Lastly, for the reproductive role of the woman is as a mother. So in a household, she bears the majority of the childbearing and raising responsibilities, and the interaction with the child shapes his behavior type. As a result, she is in charge in maintaining the family's strictest discipline. Next.
And now we are going to tackle about the reproductive responsibility. So according to Surgeon's Medical Dictionary, reproductive responsibility is a common term for a person's responsibility to avoid an unwanted pregnancy. So these are obligations that an individual must practice to prevent unplanned pregnancies, to have a safe sexual intercourse, and to prevent infections and diseases concerning the reproductive health. So for the male, we have two methods, the barrier methods and the permanent. So for the barrier methods, we have the condoms. The condom is the only form of contraception that protects against most STIs as well as preventing pregnancy. So it acts as a physical barrier, thus preventing sexual fluids from passing between people during sex. Next, we have the spermicide. So spermicide is a chemical that inactivates sperm. When a person uses it as a sole method of contraception, they need to apply spermicide into the vagina. So it works by blocking the entrance of the cervix and by stopping sperm from swimming up to the egg. Next, we have the permanent. So vasectomy, it is also known as the male sterilization and is considered as the most effective birth control option for men. So during the procedure, a tube called the vas deferens is cut or blocked. The vas deferens is a duct that carries sperm from the testicles to the urethra. Next, we have the reproductive responsibilities for female. So it also includes a barrier and hormonal method and intrauterine devices and implants. So for the barrier method, we have the female condoms. So a female condom is a long plastic pouch, usually made of nitrile, a man-made latex-free rubber. According to the CDC, female condoms are about 79% effective for contraception. So this condom lines the walls of the vagina and collects semen and other fluids and is about 79% effective for contraception. Next, we have the diaphragm. So a diaphragm is a barrier method of contraception that a person places inside the vagina. It covers the cervix so sperm cannot go into the womb or the uterus to fertilize the egg. So it is a shallow dome of silicone with a firm and flexible rim and is estimated to have 90% effectivity. Next, we have the cervical cap. So the cervical cap is inserted into the vagina with spermicide before sex to prevent pregnancy. So it covers the cervix, thus stopping the sperm from joining an egg. Next, we have the hormonal methods. So first, we have the oral contraceptive pill. So birth control pills are one of the most commonly used methods of contraception. So the pills are the most reliable when you take it consistently and at the same time each day. So being consistent helps keep the hormone levels from fluctuating. Next, we have the patches. So the patch releases a daily dose of hormones through the skin into the bloodstream to prevent pregnancy. And we also have injection. So the injection contains a synthetic version of the hormone progesterone. So the depot prevents the body from producing its own hormones and releasing eggs from the ovaries. Next, we have the vaginal ring. So it is a small plastic ring and placed in the vagina for 3 weeks, and it also releases hormones into the body to prevent pregnancy. Lastly, we have intrauterine devices and implants. So first, we have the intrauterine device or the IUD. So it is a small T-shaped device and is made from material containing progesterone, hormone, or plastic and copper. And lastly, we have the contraceptive implant. So in this method, a small flexible rod is placed under the skin in a woman's upper arm, releasing a form of the hormone progesterone.
So, what is sexuality? So, sexuality is a word we use to talk about how we understand our bodies and how we understand our relationships. This understanding includes all aspects of who we are, our values and beliefs, bodies, desires, relationships, gender, and our thoughts and feelings about all of these. Because our sexuality is made up of so many different components, our understanding of our own sexuality is ever changing and unique to each person. The most important thing to understand about sexuality is that it is self-defined. That is, that every person is allowed to talk about and understand their own sexuality in their own way that makes sense to them. Sexuality is also dynamic and always changing, and often we may discover that different parts of our lives may interact with each other in confusing or affirming ways. So, sexuality can also refer to a person's capacity for sexual feelings. More than the need to reproduce, uh, sexuality is an important part of human emotional expression and deep connection with another.
So the next one is all about the psychosocial dimensions of sexuality. So first we have there the next slide, please. The biological dimension. So this one of our sexuality involves our physical appearance, especially the development of physical sexual characteristics, our responses to sexual stimulation, our ability to reproduce or to control fertility, and our growth and development in general. Although human reproductive function does not begin until puberty, Human sexual erotic functioning begins immediately after birth and lasts a lifetime. It is important to realize that biological functioning, as it relates to sexuality, is a part of the natural functioning of human beings. These biological aspects also relate to the other dimensions of sexuality, and all the dimensions work together to produce an individual's total sexuality, which in turn is part of the total personality. Now, the physiological differences between the sexes help to lay the groundwork for the development of psycho, um, psychological and social wellness. And our gender strongly influences our perceptions of sexual wellness. For example, the sexual double standard, in which men are expected to be promiscuous, or in other words, have many sexual relationships, and in which their women are not. So, next dimension is the psychological dimension. So, although sexual activity is definitely physical, it also involves psychology, which is our sense of being. So, the noted sexual therapist Dr. Ruth Westmeyer has a favorite saying that sexual behavior is all between the ears. So, a major psychological factor that affects our sexual wellness is the body image. So, a positive body image lends itself to a feeling of overall wellness, and a negative self image can lead to a drug abuse, or a using of steroids or diet pills, or psychological disorders including anorexia, bulimia, binge eating disorder, or muscle dysmorphia. Now, the psychological dimension of sexuality is probably the clearest example of learned aspects of sexuality. Our attitudes and feelings toward ourselves and other people begin to develop very early in life. From the time we are born, we get signals from all around us telling us how to think and act. Now, regardless of whether our experiences are positive or negative, however, our learned responses to them become integral to our sexuality. And lastly, we have there, next slide, social-cultural dimension. Now, the biological and psychological components of sexuality are affected by society and culture. The social-cultural dimension of sexuality is the sum of the cultural and social influences that affect our thoughts and actions. In contrast to a perception of sexuality as being controlled mainly by biological or genetic characteristics, Teifer in 1995 stated that he also promoted the idea of social constructionism, which proposes that sexual identities and experiences are acquired from and influenced and modified by an ever changing social environment. According to the social constructionists, people acquire and assemble meanings, skills, and values from people around them. This dimension of sexuality is the sum of the cultural influences that affect our thoughts and actions, both historical and contemporary. For example, historical influences become evident when one considers roles of males and females as well as certain customs. Indeed, we are surrounded by social influences on our sexuality. Among the sources of influence are religion, multiculturalism, socioeconomic status, ethics, the media, and politics. And that ends my parts.
Okay, so now let's proceed with discovering your sexual orientation. So it takes time for many people to understand who they are and who they're becoming. Part of that involves better understanding of their own sexual feelings and who they are attracted to. So, what is sexual orientation? It is the emotional, romantic, and sexual attraction that a person feels toward another person. And there are several types of sexual orientation. We have heterosexual, homosexual, bisexual, and asexual. People who are heterosexual are romantically and physically attracted to members of the opposite sex. So heterosexual males are attracted to females, while heterosexual females are attracted to males. And homosexual people are romantically and physically attracted to people of the same sex. So females are attracted to females, while males are attracted to males. And we have the bisexual, who are romantically and physically attracted to members of both sexes. And for asexual, these are people who are not interested in sex, but they still feel emotionally close to other people. So next slide, please. How do people know their sexual orientation? So many people discover their sexual orientations as teens or young adults, and in many cases without any sexual experience. For example, someone may notice that their sexual thoughts and activities focus on people of the same sex or both sexes. And becoming aware of and coming to terms with one sexual orientation can take some time. Thinking sexually about others and the same sex and the opposite sex is quite common as teens sort through their emerging sexual feelings. Can sexual orientation be changed? Sexual orientation is a natural part of who we are and it's not a choice. So, sexual orientation can change over lifetime. These new feelings can be intense, confusing, sometimes even overwhelming. Teens are beginning to discover what it means to be attracted romantically and physically to others. And recognizing one's sexual orientation is part of that process. So, that wraps up our discussion. Thank you everyone for listening.